final lecture here on the doctrine of the church, as we have been providing just a very brief introduction and overview of the doctrine of the church and Reformed ecclesiology. As we began to talk about special office, we talked about the office of elder and minister, we talked about the office of deacon, we talked about how many offices there were in the church and so forth and so on. Now we're about to consider the matter of gender. The issue of gender among officers in the church has taken the church globally by storm. This is really a problem only in Protestantism. That is not to say there aren't any feminist approaches being advocated in Rome or in the East, but to date, the priesthood remains closed to women in both traditions. But the rise of egalitarianism in the church has been felt the world over in Protestant communions. Even churches which are fairly traditional and conservative have opened the way for women to be ordained to the special offices. Indeed, the pressure today is great. Even as a father who is also a pastor, I have been challenged by my own daughters on the question of why women are forbidden to hold office in the church. Now, I'm glad to report that they are quite settled now with regard to the biblical view. But the biblical view is, in fact, that special office is restricted to men only. The relevant texts here are 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 12 through 14, and 1 Corinthians 14, verses 34 to 35. The clearest expression of gender restriction is given in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 12 through 14. There is a definitive apostolic prohibition, for Paul forbids women to teach. Now, immediately we have to qualify the statement. The prohibition to teach is specific, not general. In other words, Paul is not forbidding women from teaching at all. We should not conclude that women are not to teach other women, or to teach children in Sunday school, or to teach in an outside the church setting like high school or college. The scope of prohibition is limited in the context, and it is so in at least two ways. Number one, the prohibition is against authoritative teaching, 1 Timothy 2:12, and two, within the confines of the church, 1 Corinthians 14:34. But at issue is not just authoritative teaching, but authority in church in general. Given the proximity of this teaching to the section on officers in chapter 3, it's clear that the authority in view is general about officers. The offices of elder and deacon, having authority in the church, are open, in fact, to men only. It is the kind of authority that Paul prohibits women to exercise. Now, this is not some special male-dominating club that Paul is advocating for. It is no fraternity or golf club with a sign outside that says no girls allowed. Furthermore, the prohibition is not grounded in some supposed inferiority found in women by Paul. It is not as if Paul here thinks that women are somehow intellectually incapable of holding office. Paul does not ground his prohibition in some belief that women are incapable of exercising authority or leadership. Paul is not a misogynist. Rather, Paul grounds his argument, you'll notice here, in the order of creation. Adam was formed first, then Eve, verse 13. But not just the order of creation, but he also invokes the order of the fall. The order of creation, the making of man and then woman, set the appropriate pattern for authority structures in the church and in the family as well. But there is a secondary reason found in the fall. For it was Eve who was deceived and became a transgressor. Of course, so did Adam, but Eve was the first. Together, the order of creation and the fall ground the order of authority within the church. This means that Paul's view of gender roles in the church is not grounded in the particular local social conventions of the day, as some have argued. In order to mitigate the prohibition, some have tried to say that Paul is not giving a timeless order or timeless order for the church at all times and in all places. But in answer to that, Paul's rationale goes back to the foundations of humanity itself, and it is not conditioned by the social conventions of his day. There is one more gender consideration that we have to discuss before moving on, and it has to do with deaconesses. There are some who say that Paul's prohibition is against women in the eldership, but not in the diaconate. That is because, in part, the eldership is an office of authority, but the diaconate is an office of service, so say those who want to distinguish. But furthermore, those who want to defend women in the office of deacon cite the instance of Phoebe, and you can find her in Romans chapter 16, verse 1. There, she is referred to as a servant or a deaconess of the church. The word being in the feminine, the Greek word being in the feminine, it is sometimes translated as deaconess. Much of the debate over whether or not the office of deacon is open to women revolves around this particular exegetical issue. Is Paul describing Phoebe as a servant in general? That is to say, is she one who is particularly known throughout the church for her distinguished service? Or does she hold a special office, one established in Acts chapter 6, the office of deacon, here feminized into deaconess? Those who forbid the office of deacon to women do so on the grounds that the office of deacon is one of authority, albeit an authority subservient to the authority of elders. The office, or the authority of the office, they say, is established by two factors. First, in Acts chapter 6, the deacons do have authority to make sure that the daily distribution of food is fairly carried out. What the deacons say about who gets what at which table is how the church ought to, in respect and deference to their authority, carry out the distribution. Second, the qualifications found in 1 Timothy 3 clearly indicate a position of not just responsibility, but authority as well. And given Paul's teaching on authority at the end of 1 Timothy 2, it seems the authority implied by the qualifications in chapter 3 is confined to men only. In light of these factors, then, understanding Phoebe as a noted servant of the church rather than as a deaconess makes much more natural sense of the biblical text.